Since the War Within is less than a week away, I wanted to dive a bit more into Brewmaster and his hero talents, Shado-Pan and Master of Harmony. Each tree has its strengths and weaknesses, but which is better, which is more fun, and which is easier to play. We'll cover all that in today's video, but first let's talk about Brewmaster at its base. Brew is feeling really strong in the beta and probably the best it's felt in a few expansions. They've reduced the bloat and made some choice nodes a little more balanced, giving you the option to play a bit more passively if you would like, and they've smoothed out the opener a lot. Getting rid of Bone Dust Brew, not needing Rushing Jade Wind up, not needing White Tiger Statue, they've made the opener just a lot smoother. Getting set up could be the most dangerous part of tanking, and I think Brew has an easier time than most tanks getting situated and getting into their rotation, and most of the time without the need for a defensive. They can handle tank busters incredibly well. We've gained an ability called Ox Stance, which is charges you get from casting Purifying Brew or Rising Sun Kick if you're talented into it. What it does is any hit that causes more than 60% of your current health has the amount of damage staggered increased, meaning you take less upfront damage. What's nice about this is it's 60% of your current health, meaning even at low health you could benefit from Ox Stance. Throughout my play, there was rarely a time I felt like a tank buster was going to kill me if I had a charge of Ox Stance. On top of that, the new War Within dungeons are kind of riddled with tank busters from trash mobs, so having Ox Stance consistently throughout the dungeon can prevent you from being blindsided by a mob's tank buster without needing to burn defensives. Now, Brew is a tank that's a bit healer reliant, but in the best way. They soak up a ton of healing, and everything that's overhealed can be turned into a hot from the August Blessing talent, meaning you never really waste a heal on a Brewmaster. Healers with really high throughput are great healers to have. Brew is one of the higher damage tanks with either hero tree. You can really benefit from both trees to pump out single target and AoE damage, and their rotation is really fun to work through with a level of skill expression I really like. You can have a general rotation working through each ability in a kind of static flow, or you can opt into the talent Blackout combo, where after casting Blackout Kick, certain abilities are buffed. Tiger Palm does double damage, Keg Smash reduces more Purifying Brew CD, Purifying Brew pauses stagger damage, Breath of Fire does more damage and reduces more incoming damage, and Celestial Brew is triggered as if it had 3 more Purifying Chi stacks. This allows you to be more creative and situational with your rotation, which can boost weak points and strengthen high points, and it's really fun to play around. Lastly, we've got a new talent called Lighter Than Air, which allows you to do essentially an in-air dash after rolling. So you roll, jump, and when you jump again in midair, it dashes you forward. Does nothing offensively or defensively, but really increases the mobility, and it's probably one of my favorite new abilities for Brew. You can really start zooming around dungeons, you can get away from mobs if you need to, and you can always be leading the pack through your key. Now, every tank isn't without weaknesses, and although Brew doesn't have any glaring weaknesses, it's got a few that players should know about. One is that it does have a lot of buttons, probably more so than any other tank, which can be a little daunting to get into. Also, Stagger is a playstyle unique to Brew, so coming from other tanks you might feel a bit caught off guard by how it works, when to purify Stagger, and just getting the general feel for Brew's damage intake. They're a difficult class to learn as well as a difficult class to master, but they're really fun once you hit that point where you start flowing really easily on the class. It just becomes smooth and fun to play. I've mentioned this earlier, they're healer reliant but in the best way, but it does still mean you're healer reliant, meaning if you don't have a good healer, you're gonna feel it. Lastly, they bring some great utility with Ring of Peace, Poison Cleanse, Leg Sweep, and Paralysis, but they don't bring a raid buff, which is hugely beneficial to having keys. They have Mystic Touch, but it's a bit of an overrated ability. It only increases physical damage, which even with melee is in short supply. The top melee damage are Frost DK, Assassination Rogue, and Enhancement Shaman, which deal Frost, Nature, and Frost, Fire, and Nature, meaning a lot of their damage isn't buffed by Mystic Touch. Although it does buff some damage, it doesn't buff the important damage. Buffs like Battle Shout from a warrior are much more beneficial for melee than Mystic Touch. As I said, Brew doesn't have too many glaring weaknesses, if any, but those are some to know if you're going into Brewmaster. Alright, let's talk hero trees. The first hero tree is Master of Harmony. Master of Harmony is centered around building vitality through damage and expelling that vitality with Aspect of Harmony. Aspect of Harmony stores vitality from 15% of your damage dealt, then for 10 seconds after casting Celestial Brew, you gain a buff where spells and abilities draw upon that stored vitality to deal 25% additional damage over 8 seconds. You have a couple different talents in your tree that increase the vitality generated through your ability, such as Way of 1,000 Strikes, which causes Rising Sun Kick, Blackout Kick, and Tiger Palm to contribute 30% additional vitality. And you also have Clarity of Purpose, which causes Purifying Brew to grant vitality based on stagger. Now let's touch on a couple other key talents. One early talent you get is Manifestation. Manifestation increases Chi Burst damage by 50%, making Chi Burst part of your rotation. It's probably the only clunky part about Brew's rotation because it feels weird to cast something in the middle of it, but the cast is fast and doesn't prevent dodging or parrying, so you're not vulnerable during it. You can opt into Chi Wave, which is a purely passive talent, but the damage is lower than Chi Burst, so you're kind of forced into Chi Burst. Another key talent from Master of Harmony is Overwhelming Force. Overwhelming Force causes Tiger Palm, Blackout Kick, and Rising Sun Kick to deal 15% additional damage to targets behind your primary target. This takes your single target abilities and adds a little AoE feature to them. It does take some clever positioning to utilize, but it's a nice added feature. And honestly, Spinning Crane Kick is fairly weak right now, and with Blackout Combo doubling your Tiger Palm damage, you can provide some nice AoE while pumping big damage into your priority target with Tiger Palm. So this adds a layer of skill expression and option into how you play certain packs. Defensively, Master of Harmony has some great talents. Mantra of Purity increases stagger removed by Purifying Brew by 10%, which is just a great addition to Purifying Brew. It helps wipe away more damage you're taking, adds some survivability to the spec, and gives you constant value throughout dungeons. The other main defensive talent is Endless Drought, which gives you a second charge of Celestial Brew. This has been a great addition to the brew kit because it adds a layer of defensive and offensive capability to Master of Harmony. You have one charge you can blast for a big shield to give you more survivability, but you can also utilize a charge offensively through Aspect of Harmony without feeling like you're sacrificing a big defensive ability. Following on Celestial Brew and Aspect of Harmony, we have Purified Spirits. Purified Spirits causes any remaining vitality after Aspect of Harmony ends to be expelled as damage over 8 seconds split to nearby targets, meaning if you have a large amount of vitality that you can't burn through with your abilities in the 10-second window, you don't lose it. It instead spreads out to all enemies and does damage over 8 seconds, meaning vitality is never wasted. Plus we have Coalescence, which is our capstone talent. What it does is when Aspect of Harmony deals damage, it has a chance to spread to nearby enemies. When you directly attack an affected target, it has a chance to intensify. Targets damaged by your Aspect of Harmony take 10% more damage from you. This is an interesting ability because it kind of creates a feedback loop for funnel damage. You can use AoE abilities to generate a lot of vitality, cast Celestial Brew, get your Aspect of Harmony buff your abilities, and then focus damage into your priority target, which then can spread to surrounding enemies. It adds a level of complexity and min-maxing to the tree that I really like. Master of Harmony has some solid strengths when utilized correctly. It's fairly passive, but does allow you to pick and choose when you utilize big damage or big defensive aspects of it. It's very strong in dungeons, both in priority damage through some funnel and AoE damage through Coalescence. Of the two trees, it's better defensively, meaning it's a safer build for new Brewmasters to play. Having an extra charge of Celestial Brew has saved me plenty of times and feels really good to have. The extra 10% stagger reduction from Mantra of Purity is great and gives you constant value throughout dungeons and boss fights. Overwhelming Force allows you to focus damage into a priority target without completely sacrificing your AoE damage, as it spreads a bit of your single target damage into surrounding targets. As I said, it does require a little bit of clever positioning, but it does add some additional value. And lastly, it does have some pretty cool visuals with you becoming an Aspect of Harmony during your buff. I think visuals are something we've seen other trees lack, and it's really nice to have some good visuals in yours. Now for the weaknesses. Chi Burst is very strong, but feels clunky when slotted into your rotation, making it not feel like a fun button to hit. With Chi Wave not living up to its counterpart, you're kind of forced into this casted ability. I would really like to see Chi Wave become competitive the same way Special Delivery has with Rushing Jade Wind. It would take a button off the board and allow for a more passive playstyle if that's something you wanted. Also, you can't generate vitality when you're in Aspect of Harmony, which means you don't really want to overlap Weapons of Order with Aspect of Harmony. Weapons of Order gives you a big damage increase, which is a great opportunity to generate a lot of vitality. So you would want to use this outside of your Harmony buff in order to make sure you're generating as much vitality as possible. This is a bit counterintuitive, as not stacking damage buffs feels like the opposite of what you should do. It's a bit more of a nuanced min-maxy style hero tree in order to get its full value. You can of course just utilize it purely in a defensive aspect and it will feel fine, but to really get the juice out of it, there's a little more to pay attention to with leveraging vitality and Aspect of Harmony together. Overall, Master of Harmony shines when you can capitalize on its strengths. It's a passive build, but with a bit of flexibility to time your big damage and big defensive plays thanks to Celestial Brew and Aspect of Harmony. The build excels in dungeons, offering solid priority damage and also improved AoE. On the defensive side, it's a great choice for new Brewmasters, providing a little bit of extra safety, a little bit of extra survivability with the additional charge of Celestial Brew, and the consistent additional 10% stagger reduction from Mantra of Purity. It adds consistent value, making it reliable in both dungeons and boss fights. Overwhelming Force allows you to prioritize single target damage without completely neglecting your AoE, making it a versatile build. Overall, I really like Master of Harmony. I like how it plays, I think the visuals are great, the damage is great, and the defensive capabilities are great. Next, we have Shado-Pan. Shado-Pan is all about building flurry charges, maxing out at 10, and spending energy to trigger flurry strikes, which unloads all those charges as attacks on your target. It's a fully passive hero tree, and it mainly focuses on damage output with very little defensive aspect to it. Most talents focus on passively buffing your core abilities, so let's dive into those talents. The first, as I mentioned, is Flurry Strikes. Flurry Strikes causes you to generate a flurry charge for every 300,000 damage you deal, which happens very quickly. Then after spending 300 energy, unleash all flurry charges dealing damage per charge. This talent is very strong offensively and can cause a big burst of damage seemingly out of nowhere. You stack the charges fast, and then simply doing your rotation, you spend enough energy to trigger it. Following that, we have High Impact, which causes all enemies who die within 10 seconds of being damaged by flurry strikes to explode, dealing physical damage to enemies within 8 yards. This is a solid node option for AoE, and also benefits from your Mystic Touch, because it causes physical damage rather than typical fire damage from something that would explode. So you get a little bit more extra juice there from the Monk's Raid buff. Next, we've got Veteran's Eye, which grants 1% haste for striking the same target 5 times within 2 seconds. It can overlap and stack up to 10 times. It's worded a bit weirdly, but basically, if you hit a target 5 times in 2 seconds, you get 1% haste and the timer is reset. Another 5 hits in 2 seconds and you're up to 2% haste. It's much easier to stack than it seems and lets you sit at plus 10% haste pretty easily. Following that, we have Martial Precision, which simply grants 12% armor penetration. It's a nice little boost to your physical damage, and as you can see, there's pretty much damage talents across the board. Some give you stat buffs, and the upcoming ones you'll see will give passive buffs to your abilities. But before that, we do have one defensive talent, and it's pretty strong: Predictive Training. Predictive Training reduces all damage taken by 10% for 6 seconds after dodging or parrying an attack. It's pretty much 100% uptime on a 10% damage reduction because you are always dodging and always parrying something in every pull. Next, we got One versus Many, which increases the damage of Keg Smash by 35%. It's a flat, big damage increase to one of your main abilities, especially in AoE. Now the next talent is good, but I believe it's bugged or has a mistake in the tooltip. Against All Odds. Against All Odds grants 1% agility per flurry charge spent for 6 seconds, stacking up to 20 times. The problem is you max out on charges at 10. And it's impossible to do it again within 6 seconds, so you never really attain the 20% agility boost. I don't know if it's something we'll get in an upcoming tier set that allows you to reach this, but for now it's a bit deceiving. Next, we've got Efficient Training, which causes energy spenders to deal 20% additional damage, and every 50 energy spent reduces Weapons of Order CD by 1 second. When playing Shado-Pan, I did notice my Weapons of Order was coming off CD rather quickly, so it does provide a good uptime increase for that, which is great. Next, we've got Vigilant Watch. Causes Blackout Kick to deal 20% more damage and increases the damage of your next set of flurry strikes by 10%. Again, it's just another passive buff to one of your core abilities, as well as giving you a buff to your next flurry strike. Lastly, we have our capstone talent, the Wisdom of the Wall. Every 10 flurry strikes spent, grant one of these buffs. Increase crit damage by 30%, dodge and crit chance increase by 25% of your verse, flurry strikes deal shadow damage to enemies within 6 yards, and mastery effects increase by 25%. Now this says every 10 flurry strikes, but it's not every 10th flurry strike cast, it means every 10th attack from flurry strikes. With your charges maxing out at 10, you typically always cast 10 attacks when you flurry strike, meaning you get one of these buffs pretty much every time. They're all pretty solid buffs. The one caveat is the buff that allows flurry strikes to deal shadow damage to enemies within 6 yards. The buff lasts 20 seconds, which is around the amount of time you need to generate and spend 300 energy to cast another flurry strike, meaning there's a chance that with some downtime, this gives no value because you'll lose the buff before you have a chance to cast another flurry strike. If you get this buff, you need to be consistently fighting into your next flurry strike to actually get the value out of it. Also, because it provides value while other enemies are within 6 yards, if things start dying as it's coming up, you can find it partially wasted on only 1 or 2 targets. As you can see, most of Shado-Pan is just buffing your abilities to do more damage. Sounds pretty solid, but every tree has their strengths and weaknesses. Let's talk about the strengths. Previously, in order to cast flurry strikes, you needed to spend 400 energy, which felt very drawn out and took a while to accomplish. They recently changed that to a 300 energy threshold, which may not feel like a big difference when you think about how fast you can burn through a full 100 energy bar, but where you feel it is how fast you can generate that 100 energy and then spend it. Energy regen is roughly 1 per decisecond, which is a 1/10 of a second, so you generate 10 energy a second. For 400 energy, you would need to be dumping energy non-stop for 40 seconds, which you would never do as pro. Dropping it to 300 was a 25% reduction in energy cost and about a 10-second reduction in time for how long it would take to spend that amount of energy, which is pretty big. That change was definitely needed for Shado-Pan and makes the spec feel much smoother now. Shado-Pan has great single target damage as well as AoE damage. Between the passive damage buffs to your core single target abilities, buffs to keg smash, high impact causing your targets to explode after being hit with flurry strikes and dying, wisdom of the wall shadow damage buff if you can get it off, there's just a lot of buffs to all your damage throughout your tree. Now this could be a weakness or a strength depending on the playstyle. For me it's kind of a weakness, but I would see it as a strength for a lot of players. Shado-Pan is a completely passive tree. You don't change your playstyle at all. You don't hold energy spenders if you're close to proccing flurry strikes, you simply play brew the way you know how, and the tree does everything for you. Predictive training is basically a 10% DR all the time because you're consistently avoiding attacks and the buff is refreshed with every dodge and parry. So the uptime on this is incredibly good. You do take your first couple of hits at full damage, but it procs very fast and doesn't drop in most pulls. Another pro, which is something I meant to mention earlier, is its synergy with Vivacious Vivification. Shado-Pan is a talent that causes Vivify to heal you for an additional 30% of its total value. This combos extremely well with Vivacious Vivification and causes your Vivify to be something you use a bit more often in Shado-Pan than you do in Master of Harmony. I mentioned that it's fully passive and that wasn't something I liked, but what I do like about its passiveness is that it buffs your core abilities. Everything you use feels like it's benefited in some way from Shado-Pan, so that's a nice way to do the passiveness. It leans into the core monk mechanics and I do like that. Now let's talk about the weaknesses. 1. Shado-Pan only has one defensive talent. Although it's a good talent, its defensive capabilities are very lackluster when it comes to Master of Harmony. Additionally, the visuals are pretty weak. You do see a little bit of a burst of rapid strikes when flurry strike procs, but it's nothing substantial or really fun to look at. I will admit the sound effect is pretty cool. Also, because it's all passive, there's little to no skill expression in it. There isn't any real nuanced way to play to make it better. You just play Brewmaster. There's no way to finesse it and do these little tips and tricks and things to make it play better. You just play the normal brew rotation. It just is what it is. I did mention before that there's a bug in one of the talents, or at least I think there's a bug in one of the talents, unless somebody has found a way to proc it, or maybe it's a tooltip error. But against all odds, the talent that gives you 1 haste per flurry strike stacking 20 times, but can only ever give you 10 stacks at a time, means you'll never get those 20 stacks. So that's something that's always bugged me about the talent, and we'll see if that gets changed or adjusted in any way in the future. Now I mentioned this as well, but I want to reiterate it since it is another weakness of the spec. Wisdom of the Wall is a time buff, so the shadow damage bonus can be lost if you don't trigger another flurry strikes fast enough. That specific buff should just be an on your next flurry strike rather than being a timed buff. Now, also a pretty unfortunate weakness is that our tier set actively works against the tree. Our tier set offers an opportunity to proc a free keg smash costing 0 energy. But with Shado-Pan, you want to be spending energy to proc flurry strikes. So our tier set kind of takes that away from us, which lengthens the time between flurry strikes rather than shortening it. Also, flurry strikes, because you're never holding spenders to prolong it, can pop at bad times and cause little to no damage. If the mob dies after the first hit, it doesn't stop the flurry and put it on a new mob, you just flurry into nothing, which feels really bad if you spent all that energy to proc it. Overall, Shado-Pan has undergone some significant improvements, especially with the reduction of energy required for flurry strikes from 400 to 300. This 25% reduction not only makes the spec feel smoother, but also reduces the time needed to build up and spend energy, improving the overall pace of gameplay. Shado-Pan excels in both single target and AoE damage with multiple buffs to core abilities and damage multipliers throughout your tree. Despite its passiveness, which can be seen as either a strength or weakness depending on your playstyle, the spec enhances all of your core abilities without requiring you to change how you play. Defensively, Shado-Pan lacks in comparison to Master of Harmony. Predictive training is good and provides consistent damage reduction, but that's all you have. You have nothing else in your bag of tricks to get you through a tight spot. You have Vivacious Vivification to boost your self-healing a little bit, but you're adding another button to your rotation and you only get that every 15 seconds. Lastly, the spec does suffer from a few issues such as the bug with against all odds, the timed nature of Wisdom of the Wall leading to missed opportunities or missed buffs if not triggered quick enough, and the tier set conflicting with the spec's core mechanic, as a zero energy keg smash is bad for your hero tree. Doesn't make sense. They need to change that, or they need to give us that energy even though it didn't cost it. It's just not something you want to see in a hero tree that your tier set is actively working against you. Despite these weaknesses, Shado-Pan remains a strong and efficient choice for those who prefer a more passive, damage-focused tanking style. In conclusion, if you prioritize damage capabilities and like having a bit more control over your survivability and damage output, Master of Harmony is likely the better choice for you. It provides solid damage while ensuring you can handle tough situations with the extra Celestial Brew charges and improved stagger management. However, if you prefer a straightforward and passive playstyle focused on maximizing damage, Shado-Pan might be more appealing. It simplifies the rotation, enhances your core abilities, and lets you focus on your rotation and dealing damage without worrying too much about complex mechanics. Ultimately, to me, Master of Harmony is the better overall option due to its balanced approach, due to its defensive abilities that are on demand, its offensive abilities that are on demand, and it just provides you with a little bit more control, which is what I really like. I like being able to min-max a little bit more here and there, play different packs differently or different dungeons differently to make it a little better, and you can do all these things with Master of Harmony, but you cannot with Shado-Pan. However, Shado-Pan is a strong contender. I've enjoyed playing it recently, and for those who want to focus on raw damage with a simpler playstyle, that hero tree is perfect for you. So you can't go wrong with either of them. Try them both out, they're really fun to play, and let me know which one's your favorite. Thanks for watching, guys.